fellas, after my good old post-top 10 hiatus, I always think to myself on what sort of game do I want to talk about next, since the selection of great games that I can reminisce about is practically endless, and that's not just due to my immortality. Especially when it comes to these retrospectives, I want to go into a certain topic that has been a part of my life since the dawn of time, or perhaps to peek through the veil to see something that has formulated the character that is Tomthechosen1. And I know for sure that one kind of experience that has shaped not just a love for one of my favorite genres, but also a certain predisposition for rooting for the bad guys in most stories is the venerable strategy game. Now, of course, strategy games run the gambit between real-time strategies such as the classic Age of Empires, pitting English longbowmen against French cavaliers in a story as old as time, to slower-paced turn-based grand strategy titles, having galactic civilizations vie for supremacy of the known universe in titles such as Endless Space or Masters of Orion. Hell, we could even talk about a certain other type of grand strategy game, but frankly, I'm not really in the mood to talk about titles that are so damn greasy that somehow going around the back of a McDonald's and taking a look at their grease trap is somehow less nasty than indulging in whatever the fish-eyed denizens of a Paradox game would have you play. And while I do got a lazy eye, I certainly do not have that intimate look about me. And so, with that fishy business out of the way, we can finally start talking about the game that we're going to be talking about today, which is of course Star Wars Empire at War, developed by the fine folks over at Petroglyph. And today, I got whatever's on the fridge today, and that is of course Karlskrona, a Rattler. It's like the Aldi brand or whatever, but hey, who cares? As you can tell lately, I've been a little famished and a little famished in my wallet. So, anyways, cheers, gang. Anyway, let's talk about some damn Petroglyph. As usual with our retrospectives, we're going to take a little look into the history of Petroglyph Games, which was founded by ex-Westwood Studios developers in 2003, after the long and storied studio closed its doors that same year. I think to start off, we should talk a bit about Westwood Studios, considering that the head honchos of Petroglyph and many of the developers that worked on Empire at War started their tenure there, and because of the sorts of games that Westwood made are pretty much the sort of stuff that Petroglyph specializes in. Now, we'll definitely do a more in-depth look at the history of Westwood when we actually get to a Westwood game, but I would like to impart on you fellas is that Westwood was one of those classic studios that seemingly barely made any terrible games while making some genre staples that stand the test of time, so damn hard that the landscape would be completely different without them. Prime of which, and probably their most famous series of titles, has to be the wonderful Command & Conquer games, that ranging from the original released in 1995 to the many sub-series that spawned off it, like Red Alert, which sets itself in an altered timeline where Albert Einstein went back in time and killed Adolf Hitler, causing a cascading series of events that pits the Soviet Union against the Allied nations. Of which Red Alert ended up enjoying several sequels, starting with Red Alert 2 in 2000, the expansion Yuri's Revenge a year later in 2001, and the third entry released in 2008, developed by EA Los Angeles, long after the closing of Westwood. And while Red Alert is great and all, I have to say that my favorite iteration of Command & Conquer has to be the Tiberium saga, starting with quite possibly one of the best damn strategy games of all time with Command & Conquer Tiberian Sun, released in 1999, in which our world gets bombarded by a substance known as Tiberium, that while being an incredible resource is slowly taking over and destroying the ecology of the planet, and in order to defend against the onslaught of Tiberium, the nations of the world created the Global Defense Initiative, also known as the GDI, which is counteracted by the Brotherhood of Nod, a cultic secret society led by their leader Kane. One element that I really enjoy in a lot of these titles are the mission briefings with FMV cutscenes that usually starred some interesting actors, such as Ray Wise as the President in Red Alert 2, James Earl Jones as General Solomon in Tiberian Sun, Billy D. Williams as the head of the GDI in Tiberium Wars, of course the great Udo Kier as Yuri in Red Alert 2, The seemingly ever-present Joseph D. Kukin as Kane, the leader of the Brotherhood of Nod, that shows up in pretty much every single one of these Tiberium games. And last but not least, we can't forget Tim Curry as the Soviet chairman in Red Alert 3, putting in a wonderful performance.
Thank you, Commander, for so thoroughly and brutally dispatching my enemies. But now I'm afraid you have outlived your usefulness. You know just enough to be a threat to me, and with that, the future of the Soviet Republic. I will not say das Svidaniya, Commander. As I can assure you, we will never meet again.
Man, oh man, those friggin' goofy ass like FMV cutscenes, they always bring a stupid smile to my face. Like, it doesn't matter if it's new or old, whether it be Tiberian Sun or Tiberium Wars or Red Alert 2 or Red Alert 3. Doesn't really matter. It always just brings a dumb joy to my face. And man, I gotta do a retrospective on a Westwood game one of these days, because man, out of all the studios that EA has shut down, that is the most tragic for me, because they're just so damn good. But today we're not talking about Westwood, we're going to be talking about petroglyphs. So let's talk about their history, which is kind of like all over the friggin' place. As mentioned before, once Westwood got shut down by EA in 2003, some of the gang came together in that year to create Petroglyph Games. And the first project that they announced was a real-time strategy game set a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Releasing in February of 2006 is the subject of today's video in Star Wars Empire at War, which is of course a real-time strategy game with a grand strategy element when it comes to the Galactic Conquest, where you pit the rambunctious rabble of the Rebel Alliance against the full might of the Galactic Empire, with orbital engagements in space having you control the various starfighters and vessels of each faction that in turn opens up the opportunity to lead a planetary assault and gain a new system for the Alliance or for the Empire. Typically in a strategy game, we only see one aspect of these various theaters. For example, it could be something like Star Wars Rebellion doing only the grand strategy stuff, or something like Galactic Battlegrounds doing the on-the-ground RTS element, but Empire at War was the first to mix all of these into one title, with varying degrees of success, which we'll get into soon. Then later that year in October came the expansion Forces of Corruption, that takes the sort of underworld faction that we see in the main game and expands it to the point that we have a full new faction known as the Zann Consortium that has its own quirks and mechanics to make it a really fun experience. In terms of the legacy of Empire at War, Forces of Corruption is not just the default that everyone thinks about when it comes to the game, but also the jumping off point for every single little mod under the sun, which we'll get to eventually. Following the success of Empire at War, Petroglyph were hard at work to develop another title, and in early 2008, we got ourselves Universe at War, Earth Assault, which is another ground-based RTS game where humanity is pitted against alien threats of some sort that I frankly don't even know about, which is a good segue into the rest of my history with Petroglyph, or I guess I should say lack of. I'm gonna be real, gang, apart from Empire at War and its expansion, I just straight up have not played a single other Petroglyph game. And frankly, this gap in my repertoire is usually pretty shocking for a retrospective, but I honestly think that it sort of reflects the history of Petroglyph in a way. See, after Empire at War, I didn't really hear much of Petroglyph, and as a young schmo who didn't really correlate studios for the types of games that they created, I was usually left to sequels as a way to continue the legacy of that studio, or playing another game from the same studio but really just noticing the "from the creators of X" type of banner on the cover. So it isn't really till now that I'm taking a look back at their releases and think to myself that honestly, and no offense, I don't think I really missed anything. Like, I'm sure these games are fine, but looking at the titles like Universe at War, Earth Assault, the only thing that comes to my mind is like, hey, this kind of looks like something I passed by on Blockbuster back in the day. And sure enough, it does have an Xbox 360 port that I probably did pass by at Blockbuster back in the day. But as a self-admitted professional, I must apologize to not just you guys in the audience, but also the folks over at Petroglyph, since I would assume that they're all wonderful people, and hopefully sometime in the future, I might actually take a look at these games to give the studio the justice it deserves. Though I gotta remind you fellas that these retrospectives are not just only like a look back on the title itself, but also my personal experience playing these games. And sadly for Petroglyphs, Empire at War is the only game that I've played out of theirs, and hopefully one day we might rectify that. But regardless, we gotta ask ourselves the eternal question of, can I play this damn game out of the box? And the answer is, yeah, absolutely. Out of all the games that we have done so far in these retrospectives, honestly gang, Star Wars Empire at War is the one game that out of the box can be played pretty much immediately. It requires little other than going into the in-game settings and selecting the changes that you so please. A large part of what makes the game so playable in the modern day is the fact that Petroglyph to this day is occasionally updating the game on Steam, such as changing Empire at War to a 64-bit executable, adding in Steamworks multiplayer so people could enjoy games online once again, and even adding in Steam Workshop support that allows you to easily download new mods for the game just right off of Steam. And it doesn't just end there. There's also updates fixing some in-game crashes, adding in new multiplayer maps for everyone to enjoy, which shows not just the level of love and support that Petroglyph has for Empire at War, but it is also reflective in the extensive and long-lasting mod scene for the game, which, like I said before, we'll talk about soon. One thing I will add though is that for the expansion Forces of Corruption, there is an unofficial patch that you can download directly from the Steam Workshop or from the PC Gaming Wiki, which I also have down below for any of your optimization needs, and I would highly recommend downloading the unofficial patch since it fixes many bugs and glitches that if left unchecked can make for sometimes a lousy experience. As for the ultra-wide gang homies out there, we don't really have much in the way of options to make the game look any better, and apart from mods that change the factions and aesthetics for a more updated look, we're going to be working with a bit of a stretched view, but basically all we can do for now. Now for the visuals of the game, unlike games like Max Payne that have had extensive upscaled textures to make the game feel much more crisp, we're pretty much stuck with the OG visuals that, while not the worst out there, they're certainly a bit dated. So with that stuff out of the way, fellas, we can finally talk about the game proper and figure out just what in the world is Star Wars Empire at War all about. Is it a grand strategy game for the ages, or is it just a bunch of goofy Wookiee business? Well, let's take a look. Star Wars Empire at War sets us in the closing days between the uneasy insurgency of the rebellion into what would eventually become the full-scale galactic civil war, leading into the pivotal Battle of Yavin that was seen in Star Wars Episode 4: A New Pope. In the campaign, you either take the control of the Galactic Empire, looking to slowly but surely weed out every last cell of resistance in the galaxy, while the Rebel Alliance for the restoration of the Republic fights its insurgency before it can scale things up to a large-scale war. Both campaigns start at the first level of technologies, and as the campaign goes on, more and more technologies are unlocked that will give access to new units ranging from A-Wings for the Alliance and the mighty AT-AT for the Empire. Also gang, I'm just gonna say, if you say AT-AT instead of AT-AT, just know that we're gonna have you executed at dawn. I don't make the rules, but that's just how it is. Anyway, eventually things will scale up to the point where the Battle of Yavin happens, and then the campaign will basically end. So really, there's not much to talk about with the premise, at least when it pertains to the main game. Once we get to Forces of Corruption, we'll have something more to say. And honestly, gang, the one final thing that I have to say is that for that one person that lives on friggin' Sentinel Island that doesn't know what the hell Star Wars is and wants me to explain it, well, maybe it's time to stop throwing some spears my way and get a damn Blu-ray player to watch some Kino. Man, oh man, fellas, how do I even start talking about Starfart? Like, Star Wars is one of those things that has always been like a part of my life, whether it be Episode 1, where I was there in 1999, I remember that stuff. Like, I don't even know where to start. And so it's such a constant that I won't explain it. But I will explain that, honestly, Star Wars to me is like probably one of my favorite sci-fi properties of all time. Like, I love the games, I love the movies. The Empire Strikes Back is probably my favorite movie of all time. So I'm not sure if I'm going to talk about my love for Star Wars that much this video, but we definitely will one of these days down the line. But regardless, Star Wars Empire at War in a narrative is pretty simplistic. It's really just about a band of scrappy rebels fighting against a galactic empire, or the Galactic Empire using the full might of this fully operational battle station to wipe them out. And so with that, how does one fight a Galactic Empire? Well, let's talk about the gameplay. As I sort of described beforehand, Empire at War has three basic aspects to its gameplay that is due to the differentiated theaters, and those theaters are the galactic level grand strategy, where you manage planets, construct different buildings and units, position them strategically, and then send them off to the enemy systems to conquer them. Once you arrive in said system, the first thing that is likely to happen is a space battle, where the fleet element of your invasion will come into full effect. This will have you pitting your X-Wings against TIE Fighters and Nebulon B frigates against the mighty Imperial Star Destroyer. Then finally after that is the land engagement of the invasion, where you get your scrappy rebel troopers to fight against the stormtroopers of the Empire and hope that your airspeeders are able to attach the tow cable to the AT-AT before it blows the living shit out of your poor troopers. Once the land engagement has been won, then that system formally changes hands to your selective faction, and then you start the process yet again to keep on conquering or liberating the galaxy. To start off at the grand strategy level, this is probably the screen you'll be seeing the most of as you build up refineries to earn credits and then spend them on a series of different buildings or units that are differentiated between the space section of the system and the land portion of the planet itself. Now, not all planets are made equally, with some planets like Coruscant having a great many build slots for you to construct buildings on, while other planets such as Kuat or Mon Cala are some of the few planets that you can build the most powerful of capital ships. Think of your Imperial Star Destroyers or Mon Calamari capital ships. In space, apart from recruitment and construction of capital ships, there really isn't much that you can build apart from leveling up your space station from a humble rinky-dink level 1 station to a mighty as all hell level 5 station that can call in smaller capital ships as its garrison. The other orbital structures really just being a long-range scanner and a gravity well generator. On the ground, on the other hand, there's quite a bit more variety when it comes to the structures one can build, ranging from defensive structures like a shield generator or turbo laser towers that will own zone anything that it comes across, to barracks and vehicle factories that will allow you to recruit units, and in some specific planets, you can even build structures that allow for the recruitment of smugglers and bounty hunters, units that can siphon credits on enemy planets to your pocket or knock out an enemy hero. As the game goes on, you'll continually develop these worlds through various technology levels that, depending on the faction that you're playing, might require the Empire to develop research facilities and research a new technology level, or as the Rebellion send in R2 and 3PO to steal technologies, which balances out the two factions between getting a giant dump of new ships and units versus slowly but surely upgrading your units at an affordable rate, actively selecting which units you need immediately and then working from there. All in all, gang, the Galactic Conquest part of Empire at War isn't going to have the depth that a lot of grand strategy games like Masters of Orion, Galactic Civilization, Endless Space, and so on have, but it suits the sort of game that it's trying to be. Because really in the end, fellas, managing your faction, watching it grow, constructing new buildings, and recruiting new units is all there to serve the two game modes that are also like probably the two biggest parts of Empire Strikes Back. And those are the orbital engagements where you have TIE Fighters and X-Wings blasting the hell out of each other, and then the land invasion where you're going to see your scrappy rebels get blown the hell up out of an AT-AT. Typically, when you start an invasion on a planet, you'll be engaging in an orbital battle where the plucky rebels bring their X-Wings, Y-Wings, and Mon Calamari cruisers against the Galactic Empire and their legions of TIE Fighters, Victory Cruisers, and of course the Imperial Star Destroyer. Space battles are fought on a 2D plane that's not too dissimilar from the land engagements, but on the whole, instead of controlling squads of soldiers shooting their blasters at each other, you're using ships and their fighter bomber contingents and typically running on a basic rock, paper, scissors balancing, then expanding it from there. For instance, fighters defeat bombers pretty readily. Then after that, you got your gunships like the Tartan Patrol Cruiser or Corellian Corvette that turn these fighter squadrons into mulch. But then we had on top of that the Victory Cruiser or Nebulon B frigate that destroys swarms of these corvettes pretty handily. Followed, of course, after that by your capital ships like your Mon Calamari cruisers and Imperial Star Destroyers that wipe out all the smaller vessels below it, except, of course, the mighty bomber that can destroy the hard points on capital ships like a hot knife through butter, or a fatso through a bottle of ranch. That is of course not to say that with a fat giant capital ship blob that you're going to win every single engagement, and inversely with a great strategy, even if you have lesser forces about you, you can turn the tide of the battle to the point where the AI might want to make a retreat to go lick their wounds, biding you time to reinforce the system or go on the offensive and attack the enemy system, wiping their forces out. That being said, naturally, the rock, paper, scissors aspect of the strategy is more deep than one would think, with the Rebels and the Empire having two very different doctrines, with the former focusing on strong fighter and bomber wings, while the capital ships are weaker but have the abilities to get them out of a snappy situation. The Empire, on the other hand, doesn't have typical fighter wings like the Rebels do, what with having them spawn and replenish from their capital ships, due to being weaker and without shields, but on the other end, the Imperials have the strongest capital ships in the game that can box most of the other ships in their weight class. But as stated before, it doesn't mean that you can play stupid and just do a capital ship mob to defeat everything. So with that, space combat I have to say is probably my favorite of the engagements, mostly due to the types of situations that you can find yourself in. There's something immensely satisfying about defending a station against a huge rebel fleet with only a couple of Victory class cruisers, where every lost unit gives you a friggin' hernia, only to go on the advantage and have your powerful Star Destroyers wipe out that rebel fleet in a different battle, capturing smaller ships with its tractor beam, and when the rebels are thinking of escaping, you turn on that gravity well generators on the interdictor cruisers and deny the rebel scum the possibility of escape. Inversely, it's really fun as the Alliance to make a well-balanced and efficient fleet and have your Nebulon B cruisers kite around the enemy capital ships, drawing their attention and fire and eliminating the corvettes, while your X-Wings swoop around the map, slapping the shit out of TIE fighters like a bad night out in Bangkok. All the meanwhile, the Y-Wings use those ion torpedoes to stop that Star Destroyer right in its tracks and melt the rest of the hard points one by one with each consecutive bombing run. Honestly, gang, I could go into ridiculous autistic detail on how much more I love like Y-Wings and TIE bombers over their fighter like counterparts, because those guys whoop some friggin' ass. The little X-Wings going beep 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 beep, like I don't give a damn. Give me a Y-Wing, give me those damn ion torpedoes, and we're gonna blow the hell out of everybody. But regardless, that's only one portion of it, because we gotta talk about the land invasion portion of it. So let's talk about the land battles. Once the orbital battle has been won, then you can send your units to besiege the system with a ground assault, which will have you taking control of command posts throughout the map and landing units on them with the goal of defeating all the enemy units and structures on the map, or holding off the assault until the enemy retreats or their reinforcements are depleted. Ground assaults usually have a few different aspects to them that can make them relatively interesting, in the sense that you sometimes have the local population that will fight for either the rebels or the Empire, depending on the system, planetary or atmospheric phenomena that could make things difficult for certain types of units, such as planets like Mustafar being so damn hot that the infantry starts to melt, or other planets where missiles start to get jammed or repulsor lifts start at a disadvantage. Furthermore, if you have a fleet in orbit, you can actually call for a bombing run that will decimate your foes, or perhaps you have a shield generator that will prevent the enemy from doing the same to your most useful structures. All the meanwhile, your turbo lasers are blasting the friggin' hell out of anything it comes across, but if something awful were to happen to the power generator, then all the defenses go offline. Similarly to the space battles, the Empire and the Alliance both have different doctrines when it comes to fighting on the ground, with the Empire once again favoring more expensive, heavier vehicles that can mop the floor with whatever the rebel scum throw their way, and the Alliance having units more focused around raiding enemy positions. Now, compared to the space combat, I found that the ground assaults to be not as fun as the space battles for a variety of smaller reasons that, in the end, at least for me, just saying, would mount up to a game mode that would tempt me to use the auto-resolve more times than not if it wasn't for the absolutely friggin' atrocious losses incurred with auto-resolve. Most of it has to do with some of the gripes that I have with the combat in general. For instance, one big one that I absolutely despise is that Empire at War has a lot of issues with the friendly AI in my opinion. Unlike a lot of other real-time strategy games where there is a decent amount of aggro towards the units, I frequently found that if I focused on another side of the map with a skirmish that was going on, whether it be with fighters or some stormtroopers that was blasting something apart, those units that I neglected would start to get shot at and they wouldn't really respond to it, and they just friggin' take it like as if there was a watermark for a seedy website on the corner. Another problem that you see a lot of in the ground battles that to me is a huge deal breaker and honestly why I almost always just want to skip these stupid battles, and it has to do with the genuinely terrible pathfinding that the units get into. That if you have a really tight area or the area you're in gets even slightly congested, you're gonna get yourself a nasty ass traffic jam that would make a daily New York commute look like heaven. Like honestly, I don't know how many times I've plopped down my AT-ATs and they kind of get into a tighter area and just stop moving and then spend the rest of the damn match trying to get untangled between each other. And man, oh man, fellas, honestly, when this shish happens, it saps the fun out of the experience. Space battles, on the other hand, I didn't really find a lot of these problems, mostly since ships can sort of stack near each other without much issue. The biggest issues I found were the unit aggro issues, where you could send them to a section of the map and while you're on the way, they'll encounter units and just not really do anything. So when you take into account that the space battles were generally less buggy and that I honestly like the space combat parts of Star Wars a lot more, then it's easy to see why I tend to fight even the nastiest orbital engagements to the bitter end in comparison to suffering another AT-AT traffic jam, preventing me from feeling the satisfaction of a Geonosian genocide. Now, for aficionados of Empire at War, you could probably tell that there's a nice big fat Dathomirian Night Sister dumpy-sized elephant in the room right now when it comes to the factions, and don't you worry, we'll talk about that soon. But before we talk about that extra portion of the game, we'll just talk about briefly the two campaigns that we have in Empire at War, that being one for the Rebels and one for the Empire. For the vanilla Empire at War experience, there is of course two campaigns that you have available for you to enjoy. That being the Alliance for the Restoration of the Republic's scheme to get more worlds to their cause and find the Death Star plans, while the tyrants of the Galactic Empire try to find and snuff out the last flame of resistance and consolidate their power in the hands of the Sith. Basically, both of these campaigns are sort of extended tutorials for the larger Galactic Conquest mode, where slowly but surely through the story missions that you're tasked with, you'll gain new units and abilities with special missions where you typically learn how to use them. Narrative-wise, there isn't really much to say since these are pretty vanilla Rebel and Empire stories without any of the character writing that we have come to admire from much more recent Star Wars set in the same period right before the Battle of Yavin, though that doesn't mean that there aren't some really neat missions. On the Empire side, I particularly remember the mission where General Veers shows off the newly developed all-terrain armored transport, or AT-AT, through a sort of Imperial proving ground that gets struck by a Rebel assault, and the other one that I really enjoyed was a mission where the Empire catches wind that the Bothans have betrayed the Emperor in some fashion, so he goes to give the Bothans a Home Alone 2 Marv special.
Welcome to bother we, Your Majesty. To what do we owe this great honor?
Your disloyalty to the Empire.
The Rebel campaign, on the other hand, I actually had a lot more fun with, not just for the sort of missions that they get up to, like Han Solo and Chewie causing havoc at the Imperial Cadet Academy on Carida, but it was also how the Rebels generally played that made them rather interesting. See, with the Empire, it's pretty straightforward, that you progress through the tech levels, acquire new units, and then use overwhelming firepower to destroy the band of vagrants that hope to destabilize the galaxy. While on the other hand, the Rebels not having that advantage in firepower need to play smarter, and you see that reflected with how you go about the missions. One of the main mechanics that the rebels have is called a raid mechanic, where they can build a small force of 3 units and strategically insert them wherever they please, causing havoc on Imperial worlds deep in the galactic core, and eventually when you unlock vehicles like the MTPL or the T4B tank, you can raid a planet, and if you defeat all the forces, you could gain the world itself without having to win the costly space battle, which for some of these worlds is a big deal since we know how powerful a Star Destroyer can be. Hell, even in the space battles, it's fun to lure your Nebulon Bs to a spot where a stray Star Destroyer or a wolf pack of Victory Cruisers would go after them, only to be lit up by a relentless onslaught of Y-Wings using those ion torpedoes to shoot them down long enough for those same Nebulon Bs to actually do a little bit of damage once their shields are down. And it's that game of cat and mouse that makes the Rebel campaign quite a bit more fun to play in comparison to the Imperial one. Basically, if there's one way for me to put it, it's that the restrictions placed on the Rebellion made you play more cleverly, while the campaign restrictions on the Empire side just made it feel like, no, you can't play with those toys yet, you haven't even finished going through the leftovers that you currently have. But all in all, gang, it's still a decent enough set of campaigns to play over a weekend if you want to get your Star Wars real-time strategy fill. Okay, now that we got that vanilla stuff out of the way, it's finally time to talk about the reason you're all probably here for, and that is, of course, for the exquisite Forces of Corruption expansion for Empire of War, which is the basis basically for why this game has stood the test of time, adding not just in a new faction in the Zann Consortium, but a whole bunch of new units, mechanics, and other things that make this game as great as it is. That same October in 2006 saw the release of Star Wars Empire at War Forces of Corruption, an expansion in an era when the term still had meaning that added gameplay fixes, new planets, new units for the Rebels and the Empire, and most important of all, it added a third faction in the Zann Consortium with its own campaign. In Forces of Corruption, you play the role of Tyber Zann, a crime lord in the Outer Rim that had his crime syndicate nearly wiped out by his former boss and rival Jabba the Hutt, who had him locked away in the spice mines of Kessel until his handy-dandy enforcer/assassin pal Uri Fenn breaks him out of prison and restarts the Consortium. From there, Zann and the rest of his band of fraudsters, murderers, and other criminal scum will have to put their effort into slowly but surely start racketeering the systems here, intimidate a local moth over there on the other side of the Outer Rim, and generally through hook and especially by crook spread corruption across the galaxy. The Consortium itself is a really neat faction because it's this nice slot between the Empire and the Rebels in the sense that they take a little bit of both factions to make a gameplay experience that truly is unlike any of the others. To start off on the galactic scale, the way that the Consortium does things is a little bit different, but in many regards takes some cues from the Rebels, where there are a lot of ways that the Consortium can steal tech from the factions and get by occupied worlds without having to start a battle on them. Essentially, the Consortium has a unit called a Defiler, which you can send to enemy systems to spread corruption and make the galaxy incredibly gassy. Spreading this corruption by corrupting the militia on a planet so they always will take your side when there's a land battle, kidnapping a local representative to show that the Consortium means business, bribing the local authorities to look the other way when a fleet goes through their system, set up the black market to steal technology, and enslave the locals to bring about some new units. The last two of those I especially enjoy since you have to set up a black market on both Imperial and Rebel worlds to get the whole shebang, since both of those groups have technologies that will in the end complement the whole Consortium roster. Slavery, on the other hand, is a wonderful tool to have under your belt since there are a select few planets that have some units that you can bring to the Consortium, ranging from Solistans that look like a racist caricature of my co-host Andrew, Wookiees, which the Consortium can find for free in my shower drain, and my favorite of all, the brave Ewok Mujahideen fighters that can be, let's say, persuaded to join the cause and blow the shit out of their own enemies. From there, the rest of the Consortium roster could be described as either having specific mechanics that turn an otherwise normal hitting unit into something a bit more special. We're talking stuff like the transport units that have cloaking technology so you can get all of your guys in all sneaky beaky like, mobile defense units that can put up a missile jammer to, well, jam the missiles, and even a Yal Salamari cage to deter the effects of force users, which makes the Consortium a fun faction to play through with all the weird abilities that you can get. My favorites on the land are definitely the Ewok slave handlers just blowing the shit out of enemy units, and the vast selection of heroes that the Consortium has, like Tyber Zann that can blast the hell out of anyone in front of him or just bribe him to join your side with a little bit of moolah. Then there's Uri Fen cloaking to get behind an enemy unit and using his twin blades to rip them apart, or using IG-88 to effortlessly blow up the Death Star on the galaxy map. And of course, the Dathomirian Night Sister Silri, whose clap of her dumpy every time she uses her laser whip will somehow snap louder than the whip itself. In space, the units the Consortium gets are just as wild and fun to play with, ranging from Mandal Mortar Star Vipers that can drop down buzz droids and rip apart any of the fighters in the area, Skip Ray blast boats that can jam missiles in a wide area while they go in for their bombing runs, the Vengeance frigates that can cloak and get into the enemy real close, and when in a pinch that you know your ship can't get out of, it can self-destruct. And finally, probably my favorite space unit that the Consortium has is the Aggressor Star Destroyer, that has a giant ass ion cannon and mass driver that will cut through the shields and bend the hull, acting as a sort of artillery piece in the Consortium Navy with its 1-2 punch. This paints a picture of the Zann Consortium as this like crazy ass, like super OP faction that is incredibly fun to play. And the truth of the matter is that, yeah, it kind of is. It's one of those things where, like, even when I play the Empire in Galactic Conquest, I always go for the Zann Consortium because, man, oh man, like, they can take a bite out of me. And I know that freaking Rancors can take humongous bites. Now, the Night Sister on top of the Rancor, well, they can also probably take nice big bites. Anyways, we got to talk about the campaign for Tyber Zann and the Zann Consortium because, man, out of all the three, this one's just the best one, like, easily enough. Got the best narrative, it's got the best missions, and it's the most memorable. So, talk about the campaign. While in this video, I won't go into spoilers since there's not really a narrative worth spoiling, but on the whole, the campaign for the Zann Consortium is the best example of showcasing what a faction is all about, by showing Tyber at his lowest escaping the spice mining prison on Kessel, to eventually busting into Palpatine's personal vault to find a little special something that will set up the Consortium to be the crime dogs of the galaxy for years to come. What I especially enjoy about the campaign compared to the Imperial and the Rebel campaign in Vanilla Empire War is that narrative-wise there's just something a little bit more going on than what would be compared to the other two campaigns. For instance, at this point, it's sort of run-of-the-mill to have a Rebel campaign mission go, "We need to steal the hacking X-Wings for the Rebellion." Or for an Imperial campaign, go into that system and wipe out all the rebel scum for the Empire. But a sort of, you're right, we're gonna steal this here Tabana gas on Vespin and pin it on Zizor of the Black Suns so Vader can go and kill him. For the Consortium is a pretty neat thing to do and goes to show how interesting the characters can be in a real-time strategy game. Like the narrative of Tyber Zann and his force-sensitive bird pal Uri Fen building a crime syndicate from scratch isn't going to win any awards, especially in Star Wars when we have stuff like Knights of the Old Republic, Jedi Knight, or the Cal Kestis games. But for a real-time strategy game, I cannot understate the joy of slowly but surely creating a crime syndicate and unlocking newer and better toys to pit against your enemies that will have you smiling like a maniac when Tyber jumps out of hyperspace with his new flagship, or setting the Night Sisters loose once they get back on their Rancors. It's basically, on the whole, just the narrative doing cool things for the gameplay, and honestly, not a lot of RTSs do that very well. But come on, man, it's a campaign where you're playing the bad guys, but done in a way that isn't just your immediate power fantasy like it would be, say, as playing as the Empire. You're a cantankerous little upstart mutt that bit off more than he could chew, slowly creating a syndicate where you're not just cleverly wiping out a rival by pitting the big dog against him, but also secretly basically keeping part of the spoils to fuel new weapons to use to corrupt the galaxy. Which is why, to this day, so many people wish that Tyber Zann and the Zann Consortium could be brought back into some sort of Star Wars thing now, because these characters left such a cool impression in the short period that you get to play them. And believe me, gang, there's some cooler shish that happens in this campaign that I'm not gonna spoil, that makes it all the better. And I guess they sort of mentioned him in some sort of like dogshit mobile game, but come on, man, that's not what we really want. We want to see Tyber Zann come back into the Star Wars canon with the coolest story, with something he doesn't even have to make like a big third empire or something like that. He's just got to come into a story, look suave as hell and cool, and just blow somebody up. And honestly, man, this campaign does such a great job of fleshing out all the characters, the Zann Consortium and Tyber Zann himself. And this is probably like one of the few points where it is like ingrained into me, like just by how cool he is, how gritty and ruthless and bloodthirsty that he wants to build his like criminal syndicate. It makes me want to like go on over to the dark side and become evil, because man, oh man, this is one of those games where I figured out at the beginning that evil is always gonna win, baby, because evil has the rule of cool and because good is dumb. One of the silly constants that have been with me pretty much my entire life is a certain affinity for playing and generally leaning towards the quote-unquote evil faction, whether it be the factions that use overwhelming firepower to annihilate all of its foes before it, or something like the Consortium where it's less a lawful evil and more of a rugged gang of criminals that take for themselves and don't play by the rules, by stealing from all sides and using tech and units that might make someone pull their damn hair out. So whether it be the Empire and Star Wars, especially games like Knights of the Old Republic where you get to tap into the dark side and zap people to death with Force lightning, or something more historical like with Rome Total War, with your crisp red cohorts and legions of Julii, even though I typically played Brudii, just saying, marching down the field throwing their pilum at disgusting Celtic savages and winning the day to expand the glory of Rome. And I have to say that strategy games have always been at the center of my predisposition to root for the bad guy. Why is this the case? I honestly don't really have a damn clue. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that most of the so-called evil factions in strategy games typically have a mix of expensive, heavy-hitting hardware, which is typically the playstyle that I like to use with strategy games, where you slowly but surely create your legions to send against an unsuspecting foe. You know, like the sort of things like Persians promising to darken the skies with the arrows before our favorite spear-loving towel boys ruined it by saying they're gonna fight in the shade. Ugh. But even when the ability of hitting hard and strong like the Roman legions of old isn't available, I tend to see myself gravitate towards the more scheming and conniving factions and characters, the sort of people that would do schemes upon schemes that would make Zinch blush, or using really clever subterfuge to get what they need and use that to further their own gains. Here's an example we can use from one of my favorite properties in Warhammer 40,000, where in the grim darkness of the far future, the factions that I gravitate towards are stuff like the Imperial Guard with endless legions of super heavy tanks, or the more artistic qualities of the Sons of Sanguinius that bring that artistic fervor to battle in the name of the Master of Mankind. But the second that we change over to the forces of the arch-enemy, it's a different matter entirely. Amongst the forces of the arch-enemy that have condemned themselves to become slaves to darkness, what I tend to like changes drastically, with probably my favorite faction amongst the followers of Chaos being the Thousand Suns Legion of wicked metal space wizards that will scheme for infinities, plan the downfall of entire subsectors to further their pursuit of knowledge, and eventually betraying their fellow sorcerers in order to pursue higher ambitions. Hell, it could even be something like the Alpha Legion, where they're always scheming, having their own contingencies and code phrases and plotting a whole takeover of a subsector and bringing it all to chaos without anyone even understanding just what the hell happened, because that is just how a guy who says, "I am Alfarius," might just do things. But in the end, gang, it's good to be bad. evil even, and it's one of the few things that I get to crawl into my little stupid ball and be in my natural habitat of trying to ruin someone's day, and like my wonderful little rat things of the Skaven, usually failing and having it blow up in my face sometimes, and sometimes quite literally. I can't really pinpoint where or when exactly I was turned into like just this evil goober. It could have been the Empire with Empire at War, or the Zann Consortium, or it could have been as playing as Rome Total War and having legions march and beat a whole bunch of Gauls into pulp. Or hell, it could have even just been playing Isengard in Lord of the Rings Battle for Middle-earth, which absolutely is a game that I gotta do one of these days. That is gonna be a fun one. It's just one of those things where like replaying this game and playing Galactic Conquest as the Empire, or replaying the Zann Consortium campaign and building a criminal syndicate from nothing over and over and over and over again. It really cemented that Star Wars Empire at War and the expansion Forces of Corruption was just a game that little Tom absolutely loved. And I can see why, because this game is just so much damn fun. Like, it's got its problems, but it's so much fun. And I get it. Little Tom, he got it, and he's evil now. Irredeemably, indisputably evil. So much so that I got a Tompire now, so for all you nerf herders out there, you better watch out. But before we wrap up all this stuff, let's talk about some of the new units that get added for the Rebels in the Empire, because why the hell not? As with any good expansion, you get not just a new faction, but also a bunch of new units to play with for the factions already introduced. And in the case of Forces of Corruption, for both the Rebellion and the Empire, there's some cool stuff to play with. I think to start off, we should talk about the Rebellion, since I think on the whole they have less units added than the Empire, but the units that they do add create some decent opportunities to do what the Rebels do best: perform raids to strike at the heart of the Empire, and retreat when their tasks are accomplished, or the tides are beginning to turn against their favor. You can see this most clearly with the B-Wing and the MC-30 frigates in space that are an obscene combination of hard-hitting and fast, with the B-Wing being a sort of souped-up Y-Wing that can just shred capital ship hardpoints to pieces faster than any Y-Wing can, and the MC-30s that are so stupidly fast that if you see a stack of 54 B-Wings and 54 MC-30s, you just know that you're gonna have the worst friggin' game of your entire life in that campaign. On the ground, you also have the new HTT-26 heavy transport that can load up on some disgusting amount of rebel troopers and Plex soldiers, get them up in the air, and surgically post them in the worst spot imaginable that will have me searching up and down the map for just where the hell it is. As for new heroes, the Rebels get a revamped Red Squadron that at this point has turned into the classic Rogue Squadron. And on top of that, we get General Garmbel Iblis, who commands a giant-ass repulsor lift bunker sort of tank that can move across the map and go punch for punch against AT-ATs. And finally, we got ourselves our little green friend in Master Yoda, who's a soldier. He'll mold ya and fold ya. I thought I told ya, don't be unwise and judge him by his size. Honestly, you won't believe your eyes when the X-Wing rise. Though, something might tell me that he's a bit of a player hater. Then on the Imperial side, we get some interesting heroes, with the highlights being General Rom Mak, who in space commandeers the Arkhammer, which is closer to a moving factory than a naval vessel, able to construct all 3 generations of Dark Troopers, followed by Darth Vader commandeering the Executor Super Star Destroyer at Tech Level 5, which just absolutely blots out the map when it arrives from hyperspace, causing every single ship in the area to start targeting it in a bid to destroy it, or initiate the jump to hyperspace, until you turn on those pesky little gravity well generators again. Though favorite of the new Imperial heroes has to be the classic Chiss Chungus himself, the Grand Admiral Thrawn, who in Forces of Corruption takes control of the Admonitor, which was his flagship during that period, and while he doesn't have the gravitas that Lars Mikkelsen has when playing Thrawn, in Forces of Corruption he still eats up every scene that he is in whenever he does show up in the campaign. But moving down the line in space battles, the Empire has mostly new TIE variants to throw at the scum and villainy of the Rebellion and the Consortium, coming with a mid-game upgrade of the TIE Interceptor, which replaces the TIE Fighter, performing wonderfully. Then there's the TIE Phantom that could cloak its way into revealing where the enemy is, and the wonderful TIE Defender that is like the Empire's version of a B-Wing, as this attack craft can just mop the floor with whatever is in its path. But the big stuff in space is the aforementioned Super Star Destroyer that is always a joy to jump into the system when you have the chance. And the uncompleted second Death Star that, while still being worked on the pace that these videos come out, I am afraid that the deflector shield will be quite operational when your chuddies arrive. Now witness the power of this fully armed and operational battle station, as it is able to individually target enemy capital ships and ruin everyone else's battle, with the quintuple whammy of having those damn gravity well generators there so you can blow them all up. Oh, I love these things. These things, oh, they get me all giddy. But on the ground, the Empire receives about 5 or so new units, with most of them being the different phases of the Dark Trooper program. With the first phase being just a little rinky-dink melee unit that nobody cares about. The second, and frankly my favorite phase, having jetpacks and the ability to mow down enemy units with its blaster cannon. I always remembered these guys in Star Wars Galaxies patrolling the place, so that's probably why I like them. And of course we have the third phase of Dark Trooper that can deploy missile launchers that are basically like an expensive version of a Flex Trooper, but this time it has a jetpack to get around the battle. Lastly, we got the Lancet Aerial Artillery and the HAVT B5 Juggernaut transport that has the most firepower of the transports in Forces of Corruption, but it can't fly and it can't cloak to get behind enemy lines as easily. But on the whole, there's a swath of new and cool units that are at this point so integral to the experience that playing the OG Empire at War feels like free balling on a speeder bike. Yeah, if you're gonna play Empire at War and the vanilla campaigns, I guess you could for like a small curiosity, but even then, it is of my humble opinion that you can just jump right into the actual like Forces of Corruption expansion and play through the Zann Consortium campaign, because that one's like a lot better. But even then, just playing Galactic Conquest with the Rebels or with the Empire, having 3 factions vie for control of the galaxy, that's like way more fun than even any of those vanilla campaigns are. But even then, when you're done playing all those games, you're done playing Galactic Conquest, you're done playing the story and seeing the rise of Tyber Zann, there's one thing left to do, and that is to go on over and look at all the cool ass friggin' mods that you can download, because man, there's some cool stuff out there. Fortunately for you guys, and unfortunately for the dumb idiot that has to write this trash and condense it into a presentable format, Empire at War thankfully is not just a very mod-friendly game, but also has an extensive and healthy mod community that is constantly creating new content and basically creating whole new overhauls of the game itself. What you immediately need to know is that whatever you are looking for, well, there's probably a mod for it. Want a top-down remake of the entire Empire at War experience with updated visuals and new mechanic? Well, Empire at War Remake. Want a mod that expands the content of the game into the era of Heir to the Empire, adding in dozens of factions? Well, you got Thrawn's Revenge. Want to take the fight back to the Clone Wars between the clone troopers of the Grand Army of the Republic and the Confederacy of Independent Systems? Republic at War. Want the Clone Wars with the systems and mechanics of Thrawn's Revenge? Fall of the Republic. Want some friggin' Halo? Go download Humanity's Retaliation. Now, I'm not going to talk about every single one of these mods because then it would double or triple the video in size, but I do want to highlight a few and maybe point you in the right direction. And to start off, if you want basically just vanilla Empire at War, but within the Clone Wars, I would highly recommend the Republic at War mod. That is a pretty straightforward mod, just adding in new factions, planets, assets, and stuff for you to enjoy playing through the Clone Wars. Though it is still a work in progress, so some heroes like say Ahsoka or Rex aren't in the campaign yet, at least of this video. But it's a really good option to get if you just want some more Empire at War, but in a different era. After that, the next step is to try out some mods that change how the game plays in various ways, and one of the most prominent examples are the Empire at War expanded mods that constitute Thrawn's Revenge, taking place during the times of the Heir to the Empire, Fall of the Republic, which takes place during the Clone Wars, And finally, Revan's Revenge that takes place during some of the conflicts of the Old Republic, like the Mandalorian Wars, the Jedi Civil War, and so on. Empire at War Expanded takes the general strategic mechanics of Galactic Conquest but adds on a variety of different mechanics, ranging from buildings and infrastructures that you can build and develop to improve your faction, some minor missions that can grant you bonuses if you complete them, a legitimacy system that allows you to change the allegiances of neutral or border planets to your side, and revamping the technologies to work on a sort of era system where instead of progressing technology levels, you're moving the timeline forward, which comes with new units and unlocks. To those new to the mod, I would probably suggest one of the smaller maps so you can learn all of the new mechanics and buildings, as well as the positions for all of the factions, since at a very first glance, it can seem a bit overwhelming. But once you get some games going and learn from the inevitable mistakes that you will make, it's a pretty damn great mod that feels like a natural evolution of Empire at War into something that has more grand strategy elements, which is one of the things that I love and was craving with Empire at War. Then, once you got your chops down with Thrawn's Revenge, you could take the knowledge and put it into a new era, such as with the Clone Wars with Fall of the Republic, or take the fight back thousands of years to the time of the Mandalorian Wars with Revan's Revenge. But just know that for the latter, that is a relatively recent project and is not as fleshed out as the other two, but the magic of Empire at War mod community making is that there are always people working on stuff. And of course, gang, this is of course not an exhaustive overview of all the mods, but if you're looking to get into the other stuff that Empire at War and the wonderful community has to offer, then hopefully this little section could point you in the right direction. So there we have it, gang. That is pretty much everything that I want to talk about with Star Wars Empire at War, and man, I do gotta say, replaying this game, it was quite of a bit of an enlightening experience for me. Unlike a lot of other retrospectives that I have done on the channel so far, where I used to play the game quite regularly, like with The Evil Within or with Fear, Empire at War is a game probably closer to Space Marine in that I think the last time that I genuinely sat down and played it was well over 10 years ago. Prior to that point, I have to say, gang, that in my memory and in my heart, Empire at War was one of those games that I just played continually ad infinitum. And frankly, a series of other strategy games that I also played, like Warhammer 40,000 Dawn of War, Sid Meier's Civilization, Rome Total War, and so on, which in and of itself was part of the rotation of other types of games of other genres that I used to play all the time. But it begs the question of why exactly did I stop playing Empire at War when I would still occasionally play Dawn of War 2 and co-op, or games like Civ 5 or Rome Total War, which were games that I always went back to and are always installed on my computer. But Empire at War was just sort of left behind. If I really had to get my noggin jogging, I think a big part of that just had to do with the fact that by that point I was already playing on PC mostly and making enough money to start getting into the journey of playing and enjoying new to me experiences, while before that point you're just a kid and you basically played with what you had. Back then we didn't really have all the choice in the world with wondrous Steam or GOG sales or services like Xbox Game Pass that were specifically on the PC. So with every game that you got on PC, having to put the disc into the drive and installing it, sometimes with 6 or so different discs, you kinda had to play that over and over and over again, the games that you had. And for a strategy game like Empire at War, you sorta had everything in one bundle. Games like Dawn of War or Civilization were split between the two sorts of modes that they had, which for the former was real-time strategy of building your bases, recruiting units, and then sending them against the enemy, or in the case of Civilization was more of a grand strategy 4X game where you explore, expand, exploit, and exterminated the enemies on the game map without the real-time element, while Empire at War was basically the best of both worlds. You had the Galactic Conquest level grand strategy of building fleets and recruiting armies to send against your enemies. You had a pretty decent space real-time strategy portion of it that saw the initial stages of the invasion, and then finalizing it all with the ground combat that played more like a normal RTS game. And sure, the RTS combat and the faction variety was better in Dawn of War, but the strategic map in Dark Crusade, it's pretty bare bones. Same could be said of Civ, where the grand strategy element of it is infinitely more in depth and complex compared to Empire at War, But there was no real-time element to the game. The only game that was similar to Empire at War that I frequently played, and honestly I still frequently play, was the Total War games, where you had the grand strategy element, and then when the battles needed to be fought, you went to a real-time tactics sort of mode. And in many aspects, Total War was better than Empire at War in both sections, which is probably why I continued playing the Total War games as time went on. But you know what, gang? In the end, even though Empire at War is rough around the edges in many respects, it's still a pretty damn baller campaign, even if simplistic as far as narrative goes. But probably the aspect that I loved the most in this retrospective, even if I didn't get too in-depth into it, is the fact that even though I left Empire at War behind to play some other strategy games, the fine folks over at Petroglyph and the fans sure as hell didn't. And we get to see that to this day with a still vibrant and dedicated mod community almost 20 years later. I gotta say, fellas, that out of all the games that I've done on my retrospective so far, I do gotta say that, like, Empire at War is probably the one where I've looked back on it now and it's got like way more flaws than little Tom used to remember, but still though, at the end of the day, Empire at War is still so much damn fun to play, and it's nice to take a look back at one of the origins of how Tom turned to the dark side and got up to some genuinely villainous behavior. But regardless, gang, even if there are like better real-time strategy games out there, even though there are better grand strategy games out there, if you want a real-time strategy game with a hint of that grand strategy element in the Galactic Conquest set a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, there honestly ain't no better damn game than Star Wars Empire at War and its expansion Forces of Corruption. Sometimes when we look back on the things we loved when we were younger, we come across media that isn't quite what we remembered it to be, or it's just as good as the day as you first enjoyed that experience. And usually with those types of experiences, we're still continually thinking about them or enjoying them in some capacity. Star Wars Empire at War inhabits a sort of middle ground where I do genuinely remember a lot of the fun conquests that were had and a wonderful campaign setting up the Zann Consortium. But at the same time, this go around, I really got to recognize how some of the aspects of the experience are really a bit rough around the edges, especially when it comes stuff to like the pathfinding and the AI, but on the whole, Empire at War leans a lot closer to a still really enjoyable experience that for anyone looking to play some real-time strategy goodness in the Star Wars galaxy, well, it's still pretty much unmatched and is ready to play just right out of the box. So with that, gang, if you want to pick up a copy of Star Wars Empire at War and its expansion Forces of Corruption, you can get them both in the Empire at War Gold Pack, which can be found on Steam and Good Old Games for about €20 or $25 Canadian, which might seem a little bit steep for a 20-year-old game, but it's definitely worth the price, and it goes on sale quite frequently. And there you have it, gang. That's pretty much all I gotta say about Empire at War. And man, what a fun little game to go back and reminisce about. You know, it's a little flawed in some areas, but still, it's a fun damn game and a good exercise, and not every single one of my damn retrospectives has to have a giant ass friggin' spoiler section, and I don't have to talk about the narrative ad nauseum over and over and over and over again. But it's nice to do that. It's nice to talk about something, you know, not heavy, story intensive. But regardless, for all the fellas out there that made it all the way to the end here, thank you so damn much. I really do appreciate each and every single one of your views. It's wonderful, and I see it. I see that you guys make it to the end here, and I love it. But for all the people that are new to the channel here, hey, welcome to the Tomthechosen1 experiment channel, whatever the hell. And I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you did enjoy the video, hey, take a look at some of my other stuff, my other retrospectives or game reviews. You might find something in there that you might really like. And if you like that stuff, then maybe subscribe. That'd be pretty damn cool. But regardless, gang, what do you guys think about Star Wars Empire at War? You guys ever played it? You guys ever, like, have you never played it before? You looking forward to it? If you got some experience with this damn game, put it down in the comments down below, because I gotta shield the stupid stuff. And while you're at it, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, all that trash. But anyways, regardless, gang, this is Tom the Chosen One, and I gotta bid you guys adieu because I gotta go and snort a big ass line of Calkite, synthetic Calkite, that I just got from a bunch of Gormans that I genocided just now. And with that, gang, you boys, take it easy.